Over 4 years ago, I went to work at a warehouse in the small town that I'm from. So, ironically, I started this job on April Fool's Day of 2018, and I had no kind of high expectations for the job. All I wanted was to do my work, get paid, and go home, as I had 2 children and many things that I could work on there. The job wasn't hard, and it made pretty good money for all the duties considered, so I really couldn't complain. I worked second shift for about 5 months, and then I went to day shift. While working on second shift, I kept to myself mostly, until one day I met someone after striking up a conversation about gaming. He was a pretty good guy, and we had a lot of things in common. I went home that night, and oddly, he popped up as a suggested friend on Facebook, so I decided to add him. When I did, we started talking more at work, until he suggested that we should hang out, so we did. Pretty frequently. We were friends for around a month at this point, and one day, he decided that he was going to introduce me to his partner. She seemed decent at first, super nice, didn't seem to be a judgmental type, so I was cool with her. From then on, I would hang out with him when my kids were spending time with my mother. One time we were talking at a restaurant, and out of nowhere he started venting to me. Dude, she's such a bitch sometimes. The other day, I forgot to take the trash out, and she threatened to stab me if I didn't. I've never been in a relationship where someone's threatened me, but she's got good intentions. When he said that to me, I was concerned, but of course, we had only been friends for a month, so I thought that maybe he was just joking, so I chuckled at him. He gave me a pretty serious look and said, "I'm not kidding, she really did." Fast forward about 8 months. They're still together and we all hang out pretty regularly. I had forgotten about the things he told me back then. One day, we were all talking and he seemed a little off, so I asked him what was wrong in front of her. He flashed a smirk and said, "Nothing, dude, I'm just a little tired." He didn't have his eyes on me, though. He had them on her. When we went to work the next day, I asked him again, "Do you promise to keep this between us?" Of course, I agreed. He said that he was breaking up with her and that she had gone a little crazy. He said that she grabbed her gun and pointed it at him and said, "If I can't have you, then no one will." He said that he defused the situation and is trying to look for a way out. I just said, "You'll figure it out, man. If you need somewhere to go then, you can stay with me until you get her out of the house." Fast forward around a year, and he finally decided to leave her. When he did, she flipped out again. This time, he told her over text. She said that she was going to find him and kill him. He was actually out of work on the day that this happened. He sent me a text that said, "Hey, let me know if she comes over to work looking for me." That struck me as odd because I had no idea of the situation that was unfolding. She actually did come to our work and she asked me where he was, and I said, "I have no idea. I thought he was with you and you guys went out of town or something." All she did was roll up her window and drive off. I called him and told him that she came by, and apparently that led him to call the police. They had found her up the road with a loaded gun in the car. 2 months later, he decided to talk to her again, and when he did, he also had something to tell me. He called me and asked if I had seen her around, and I told him I hadn't. He said to me, "I would take some vacation days if I were you." Dumbfounded, I asked him why. He said, "Because she's out of jail and her cousins are in town trying to find the people she has personal vendettas with. You're one of them." At that point, I was terrified. I grabbed my kids and bolted out of town. Come to find out, that next day, her and her cousins went to the next town over and shot 3 people in an apartment and killed them. The reason why he knew they were coming after me is because they made a Facebook Messenger group that he was included in and sent a list of names. Everyone regarded it as spam and decided to disregard the message, but he knew what it was. 3 of the names on that list were the people that they shot. The 4th name on that list was mine. After they found the evidence, he decided to go public about the group and the screenshots that he had, and they were all charged with first-degree murder. From then on, I was very careful about who I would stick my neck out for, because even though he knew the context of that list and her intentions, he decided not to inform anyone else on it. Needless to say, we aren't friends anymore, and I dodged a bullet. Literally. Alright everyone, today we're going to be exploring some terrifying stories from people who have interacted with killers, kidnappers, and in general other people who did not have the best of intentions. You're not going to want to miss this one. Before we jump in though, I want to give a little bit of a channel update, basically just establishing the 4 different kinds of videos you're going to be seeing on here from now on. The first kind are these videos, which I think from here on out I'm just going to lump together as the Campfire Stories series. If anybody has any unsettling, unexplainable, uncanny stories, be sure to submit them using the form link in the description, and you may have a chance of it showing up in the series. Next, we have the Iceberg videos and the Disturbing Rabbit Hole collection, which both of those are really just more documentary-style videos. Those tend to be like an hour long, and we take deep dives into usually pretty serious topics. And the 4th kind is a bit of a secret project I'm working on right now. I don't want to dive too deep into it, but if you were a fan of all of the mind-bending stories we've covered on here, and just sort of the crazy, unexplainable stuff, I think you're really gonna like this next series. Now, I don't want to waste any more time because this is one of the most intense videos I've posted in a long time, so without further ado, grab a snack, get comfortable, and shut the blinds. My brother saw a ghost as a kid. 2 decades later, I realized what he actually saw. I was about 7 years old, my brother about 10. It was well past our bedtime when our mom woke up off the couch to put us to bed. Our dad worked construction out of town back then, so it was often just us 3 at the house for weeks at a time. Up the stairs and to the immediate right was our parents' bedroom. Going left put you in the middle of a hallway. Taking another left down that hallway led to my brother's room. The opposite end was my room, which was also across the hall from our upstairs bathroom. At either end of the hallway are windowed doors we always kept locked and rarely used. The door on my end led to a balcony overlooking our front yard, and the door on my brother's end opened to our back porch. The house kinda leans into a small hill. My brother and mom both had a habit of waking up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. I only knew this because I was always a light sleeper, and they just couldn't help flushing with the door wide open. This night, however, my brother stopped on his way to his room and came back towards the bathroom. I'm gonna try to pee before I go to bed. The past few nights, I've been too afraid to walk to the bathroom. I keep seeing a man wearing stripes at the end of the hallway. As a little kid, him telling me this terrified me. The fear of seeing a ghost like that at the end of the hallway or through the windows is the reason I started running from the stairs to my bedroom at night. Years later, when I was about 18, my mom and I were having a conversation in her car about a dog we had for a very short time when I was little. We were sharing stories about Max's tendency towards destroying my shoes and other unruly behaviors when my mom blurted out, "Do you remember that time I opened the front door for the cops and Max ran inside to the kitchen and started tearing open that big bag of dog food?" This really caught me by surprise because in all the years I've lived in that house, We never once called the cops. I asked her what she was talking about, and she looked equally surprised, as if she had just revealed something by accident. Oh, that's right, I never told you because you were too young at the time. One night, I woke up hearing noises outside my window, and when I looked, I saw a man staring into my bedroom. She went on to describe how turning on the lights caused him to take off running, and how she grabbed my dad's pistol before calling the cops. She proceeded to say, I can't remember all the details I gave them when they showed up. Tall white male, wearing a striped shirt and jeans, short dark hair, something like that. They said it matched the description of a man they were looking for in the area. Turns out he had escaped from jail on a murder charge. Now, I know it sounds so obvious hearing these two stories back to back, but it wasn't until a few years ago, in my mid-20s, that I pieced together that my brother had unknowingly warned us about a murderer who spent multiple nights casing our home. After high school many years ago, I was in a bad place. My guardian had kicked me out after graduation. She didn't help me find a place to stay, so I lived in my car for a couple months. I met some heavy metal dudes at work one day. I had seen them around town, and all my other friends knew who they were. Everyone loved them. We became friends over a couple months, and they offered for me to actually move in with them. I agreed. Looking back now, though, I wish I had just stayed in my car. The two main roommates were brothers named Andrew and Seth. They were in a band. They also believed in the occult and things of that sort. I never really believed in that stuff, but I'm not one to tell someone what they should and shouldn't believe. They had let me live with them rent-free for several months, so who was I to complain? Being the only female in a house full of young men, I was always looking over my shoulder. You never know who you can trust. Turns out, I was right to worry. Over time, their friends started to stay with us for longer periods of time, sometimes weeks. Their friends were another group of brothers that they had gone to school with. There were 5 brothers in total, but only 2 stayed with us consistently. The younger brother, Mark, was very polite. He cleaned up after himself and always helped with the household chores. The other brother, Adam, had a laundry list of mental problems. He had apparently done some hard drugs back in the day, and it had developed into what seemed like psychosis of the religious sort. He had done time in prison for assaulting a woman with a Bible. He would often look you in the eyes and tell you he could see how you would die. Once he told me that I was possessed by a demon and that I needed my soul cleansed. Everyone in the house knew that he had these problems, but he was their friend. They helped him through his hard times and gave him a place to stay. Otherwise, he would be on the streets. I was always on guard around him after the things he told me. No one else seemed to be as concerned as I was. They should have been. One day, I was sleeping and my phone rang. It was my boss. He asked if I could come into work an hour early. It was only 12 p.m., I was broke, and I had nothing better to do, so I said yes. I got up and began getting ready to leave. I walked out into the living room to see Mark and Andrew sitting on the couch, while Adam sat on the floor by the TV. He was watching scripture videos on YouTube. Some real end-of-days shit. That was fairly common, so I went about my business. I said goodbye and left for work. I was almost done with my shift when the phone rang. My boss answered, handed the phone to me, and said, "For you." I was just a cashier, so I assumed it was a friend that couldn't reach me on my phone. I answered and heard a man's voice that I didn't recognize. "Hi, this is Detective Williams. Something happened at your apartment today, and we need you to come to the station to talk about it." I left work immediately. I had assumed one of the brothers had been arrested for drug dealing or something, but I was very wrong. I got to the station and was buzzed in. An officer escorted me to a small, cold room with a camera. He gave me a bottle of water and left me by myself for about 30 minutes. My mind was racing, thinking about what could have possibly happened. He came back in and informed me that Adam had stabbed and killed Andrew at around 1 p.m. I was shocked. I had just left the house an hour before it happened, and everything seemed fine. I asked if there had been a fight. The detective informed me that there hadn't been a fight, and it seemed to have happened out of nowhere. I gave my statement to the police and left with nowhere to go, still in shock and confused out of my mind. Our apartment was a crime scene, so I went to another friend's house to watch the news report, since the police wouldn't give me any information on the case. Over the next couple of days, the information began to be released. Adam hadn't just stabbed Andrew once, not twice. He had stabbed him over and over and nearly decapitated him. After the murder, he ran down the road, still holding the weapon. He called 911 and informed them of what he had done. I watched the news report in horror. We had known he was unstable, but this? He had fully confessed to the brutal murder and provided police with his notebooks. He had apparently been planning to murder all of his brothers, my roommates, and me. He thought we were all possessed by demons, and that this was the only way to free us. Luckily, none of his other intended victims were there that day. Mark unfortunately witnessed the murder, but he luckily escaped. If I hadn't gotten that call from my boss, I might not be alive today. To be honest, stories like these where people are clearly experiencing psychosis or some sort of a mental health crisis are honestly some of the scariest stories I think we cover on this channel. Let alone how horrific this must have been for the people who were actually killed in this incident. To actually completely lose your mind like that must be horrifying. To the person who posted this story, I'm sorry you had to go through this. And I hope that somewhere along the line since this happened, you've been able to make some peace with the situation. I'll start by saying I have a terrible biological father. He has been a shady person all of my life and constantly caused me a lot of grief. This is just one of those examples. When I was 4, my parents split up. My mother and I moved states, and they agreed I would visit my dad every school holiday for a week. This one particular time, I had been with him for a few days when I was playing with my cousin at a nearby park. A car pulled up, and I recognized the man as one of my dad's friends. He called me over, and without thinking, I ran over to him and left my cousin at the park. He asked me if I could show him where my dad lived, and I agreed and got in his car. I gave directions and didn't notice at all that they weren't following them correctly. Looking back, I didn't really know the way anyhow. After way too long, I did realize that we were getting closer to the city, which is far from my dad's house. We pulled up to a home that I didn't recognize, and the man told me to wait in the car. I did, and I didn't feel scared at all for some reason. He eventually took me inside, and I definitely started to feel unsafe then. I mainly remember 2 girls passed out with their tops off. and a much older man was feeling them up everywhere. I made eye contact with this man, and he made me sick to my stomach. I had definitely figured out that this was a bad situation by this point. A lady took me into a bedroom and brought me a sandwich. The bread was stale, and I wasn't hungry, but I ate all of it because I felt bad for her for some reason. The lady told me a lot of things I didn't understand, but when she left, I remember thinking that my dad was coming to pick me up soon. I fell asleep waiting for him. I wet the bed that night, and no one came to see me the next day until I cried very loudly and banged on the door. The lady came back and yelled at me for stinking up her bedroom, and I asked about my dad. She said he was coming tonight after he finished work. She didn't offer me a shower or a bath, so I sat in my soiled pants all day. After that, everything turned into a blur, really. My dad did not come that night, and I was terrified. In my head, I felt like I was there for months. I thought I was missing school and that everyone had forgotten about me. In reality, I was there for 5 days. I don't remember eating much except for boring sandwiches, and I had chips and gravy once. Finally, my mom drove across the country to come and get me. After not being able to get a hold of me or my dad for so long, and then me missing my pre-booked flight home, she panicked and came looking for me. Thank God she did. She found my dad at his girlfriend's house, methed out completely, hiding out. Turns out he owed a lot of drug money to the people who had taken me. They had told him that they had me, but he either couldn't afford it or didn't want me back. Whatever it was, he didn't bother trying to come get me. My amazing mom paid his debt for him after borrowing from a lot of people, and she came to get me back. I remember the moment that someone came into that room and told me that my mom was here. It was the best feeling to be safe again. She took me home, and I didn't see my dad again for a very long time. She never called the police. My parents' relationship was very complicated then, and I fully understand the choices she made. I'm definitely okay now. I've spoken about this in therapy, and I've come to terms with most of the things that I went through as a child, but still a f***ed up situation for a 4-year-old girl to have to be in. This one obviously could have gone a lot worse. If the people who kidnapped her had any more resentment towards her dad, they could have easily made sure that this little girl never saw the light of day again. It's scary to realize what people are actually capable of, especially when driven to the edge by money, drugs, or whatever else. So, last night I was at a classmate's house working on a group project we have due tomorrow. I live in an apartment in the town where our university is located, and my classmate lives at his parents' house, which is in the foothills just outside of town. In order to get to the house, you have to drive along a relatively secluded and narrow 2-lane road for about 5 or 6 miles. We started working on the project at about 6 p.m., and I ended up hanging around for a while after we had finished working. So I left his house pretty late at about 11 and started down the road back towards town. I didn't realize how tough it would be to navigate the road at night. There were no streetlights, and the road was unkept and riddled with potholes. On top of this, I had no cell service, so I had to drive very slowly to make sure I didn't blow out one of my tires, since I had used my spare a couple of weeks back. I figure I was about 3 miles from the house when I rounded a tight corner and saw a pickup truck with a camper shell parked diagonally across the road. The manner in which it was parked completely impeded my path, and I couldn't drive around it because there was a gully on both sides of the road. The only way for me to go at this point was backward, where there was a pull-off that I could use to turn my car around. At first, I couldn't see inside the cab, but when I turned on my high beams, I saw that there was a man slouched over in the driver's seat, his head resting against the steering wheel as if he had been knocked out after a bad accident. I immediately sensed that something was wrong. The way that his car had just coincidentally come to rest in a position that totally blocked the road was a huge red flag for me. I had heard stories of people playing dead in the road as a way to lure unsuspecting people out of their cars so they could rob them. I decided, fuck this shit, and elected to go back to my classmate's house and explain what was going on. I threw the car into reverse and kept my eyes darting back and forth between my rear view and the truck. I looked and saw that I was almost to the pull-off where I could turn around. When I looked back, my heart skipped about 5 beats. The man who had been slouched over in the driver's seat was now running towards my car while a few other men jumped out of the camper shell and started moving towards me as well. I panicked and accelerated backwards into the pull-off, which messed up the undercarriage of my car pretty bad. As I shifted into drive, the guy was already at my passenger side door tugging on the handle, which, thank the Lord, was locked. I only caught a brief glimpse of him, but his face appeared to be scabbed and leathery, definitely a meth head or some sort of drug abuser. I sped away and didn't slow down at all until I reached the house, constantly checking my rear view to see if they were following. Thankfully, they didn't tail me, and when I reached the house, I explained what had happened to my classmate and we called the cops. My buddy's parents were kind enough to let me stay the night. They didn't find anyone on the road matching the description, but I filed an incident report and they told me they would be on the lookout for similar vehicles and suspicious activity. In the second half of 1998, I had taken a job as a security guard at a plant that made locks. Being a kid, I usually worked one of 3 shifts, either 4 p.m. to 12 a.m., 7:30 p.m. to 3:30 a.m., or 12 a.m. to 8 a.m. The 7:30 to 3:30 shift was for extra coverage, so there were always 2 of us there from 7:30 to midnight. It was a routine, boring job for the most part. We did our rounds, logged anything out of the ordinary, and watched a tiny monitor displaying the CCTV feed. Things went by in an almost painfully normal manner for 6 months. I worked, saved, bought a car, and planned a move. By late March of '99, I served my notice and prepared to head cross-country. A new hire was brought in to fill my spot, a soft-spoken man named Calvin. As part of his training, Calvin spent time working all hours. At night, he was a shadow, working with myself and the other night guard, getting a feel for the plant's nocturnal routines. Most nights, he worked with myself and Amira, a female guard who was around my age. I was 18 at the time. Calvin, who was about a decade older, was quiet and polite, though something seemed to be missing. There's a spark that genuinely nice people seem to have, and he didn't possess it. Whenever he went on rounds with me, he'd ask questions about the job and make small talk. I noticed that he was a little odd, laughing at odd times and changing his tone mid-sentence. At the time, I chalked it up to him being awkward. That wouldn't last. One night, near the end of his first week, he went on rounds with Amira. When they returned to the office, I could immediately tell that something was wrong. Normally talkative, she would barely say a word. Not sure what had happened, I waited until Calvin had gone to the restroom to ask. During their trip, everything had been normal until they reached the brass mill, a portion of the plant that shut down at 6 p.m. There were usually no employees there after that time, and no lights were on. They were making their way to a checkpoint on a landing atop a flight of stairs when the mood shifted. She told me that she turned around only to find that he was right on her. Startled, she backed against the grating at the end of the landing, and he leaned in towards her, his face nearly touching hers. He flirted in a low voice, and when she mentioned his wedding band, he said it would be over soon. From then on, I did the rounds, taking Calvin with me each time. The night ended without further incident, and I left a note for our supervisor detailing what had occurred. The next night came and went with no Calvin. I did the rounds while Amira stayed in the locked office. Same thing the night after. Then, on my second to last shift, I come in to find her freaking out. She found out why Calvin hadn't been at work. He had been arrested for murdering his wife. She had been dismembered and burned, parts of her body placed in a pond less than a mile from where we worked. That night and the next, Amira called the jail just to make sure that they were still holding him. Based on the time frame, he had killed his wife months before he started the job. The user then attached a link to a news article regarding the man's arrest, and after doing a little bit more digging on my part, I found that this story is, in fact, 100% true. I was even able to pull up the man's criminal record, and despite him being arrested around 25 years ago, he appears to still be behind bars to this day. That's all we've got for today's stories. If you have any uncanny, unsettling, or unexplainable stories of your own, be sure to submit them below using the form link in the description.